So first of all, thank you very much for joining me, Tim Mead of Yeo Valley. We were discussing briefly off camera there the structure of Yeo Valley, and I think a lot of people will know your brand very, very well through major supermarket chains as a purveyor of organic dairy produce. But could you just tell me what else you guys do under that umbrella?
Well, I guess so. My parents moved to the Yeo Valley 60 years ago, last October. The Yeo Valley brand has been around for 30 years. And like most dairy farmers, my father worked out that he needed to diversify to basically stay in business. I mean, I think in 60 years, we've lost 150,000 dairy farmers.
Wow.
And there's now probably, around 10,000 dairy farmers left in the UK. So he set us on a course of taking our milk, adding value to it and selling it to supermarkets. And the real catalyst was when the Milk Marketing Board was disbanded in 1994. And that's when we really officially kicked off trying to grow the Yeo Valley brand as an organic brand. So since 1994, we've been doing a few yogurts, and we've gone into milk and butter and cheese. And we're probably processing not just the milk from our 2 dairy farms, but we're probably processing the milk from about 125, 140 other organic dairy farms from all across the UK.
Wow, amazing. So huge, it turned into quite a huge operation. Am I right in thinking that you as a brand were kind of early days with adopting organic methods?
Well, that's it. I mean, it's a bit murky when you go back in, so the Soil Association was founded in around 1946. And incidentally, they didn't actually start measuring CO2 in the atmosphere till about 1958. A chap called Mr. Keeling. So the Soil Association was founded because of the concerns over what we were doing to the soil, and more importantly, what that food generated from that farming system would do to us. Okay.
Right.
Then it took a long time for there to become standards. So in 1994, when they disbanded the Milk Marketing Board, a group of about 8 dairy farmers who were farming organically came together to form a farmer cooperative, and we sourced the majority of our milk for our brand via the Organic Milk Supply Cooperative. And they've grown from 6 farmers to nearly 250 farmers over a 25, 26-year period. And therefore, there's a whole, so within the organic farming world, there are lots of different pillars. There's people who would claim that they've been nothing ever but organic farmers since time began.
Right.
Then there were people who came in and converted, who'd adopted some of the non-organic principles, and then they converted back to organic. So it's a really broad church of farmers, and that decided to farm organically. And the impetus for us was less about, I probably shouldn't say this, I'll probably get hung, drawn and quartered by somebody in our business, but the principle wasn't about necessarily the standards of what you can't do. It was more about what we could do for the land, and more importantly, coming from 500 years of dairy farmers, it was more about trying to protect a dairy farmer who wanted to be a family dairy farm and not having to then become a much, much bigger farm. So
right.
I really felt about 30 years ago, my road to Damascus moment was, why shouldn't somebody who is producing really good quality, nutritious food be able to make a living out of it, instead of having to have a theme park on their farm or do camping or bed and breakfast? And we just don't value the ability of people to go out and work really hard, as dairy farmers do, and actually make a living. And I think that was more of the reason for throwing our weight behind trying to grow the Yeo Valley organic brand, than the thought that it's about, no, you can't do this, you can't do this, I'm not going to poison myself with the so there's all of that is really, really relevant to organic food. But for somebody who's probably had a few fags and drank far too much in my lifestyle, in my early years, I don't think eating organic food is going to save me from the damage that I did. but I think it is much more important for communities and individual family businesses.
Okay, so a good few questions have come up listening to you speak there. The first one, which I'd really like you to explain a bit more about, is what is or was the Milk Marketing Board, and how did it negatively affect farmers' ability to make a living? And why did organic step outside of that?
Okay, admission number one, I am a chartered accountant, but I am the son of a dairy farmer. So basically, everybody knows that to have a market functioning, you've got to have many buyers and many sellers. Okay, in milk, basically, it's worse than that because you've got many sellers. There used to be 150,000 dairy farmers, and you never had many buyers. Okay, because all the buyers would have to build the big factories to process the cheese and the milk and the bits and pieces. So starting off from that level, there was never going to be the value flow down from the consumer to the manufacturer to the farmer, because it's made a lot worse because milk comes out of cows every day. So if you're a grain farmer and you don't like the price of wheat, you don't sell it.
Right.
If you're a beef farmer and the market price is low, you might hold on to your cattle for a bit longer until it recovers. With dairy farmers, you can't stop it. So basically, it makes it even worse, and you end up being a price taker. So in the 1930s, they realized this and they introduced a statutory monopoly. So every farmer in the country had to sell their milk to the Milk Marketing Board. The Milk Marketing Board then sold it to a range of end uses, whether it was going for cheese or liquid milk or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they pooled the basket of prices that they would get for it. And then the farmers got an average price, depending, and it didn't matter whether you were in Suffolk or Somerset or Worcestershire or Cornwall. The farmers ended up having a average price from the Milk Marketing Board. Along comes the fairly capitalist thought process of Mrs. Thatcher Milk Snatcher, and they decided that, and it was partly going into the European Union, they partly decided that having a statutory monopoly was not in the best interest of consumers, and therefore they had to get rid of the statutory monopoly. And at that point, in 1994, all the dairy companies then went out and started signing up their own farmers, etc. Various farmer cooperatives started up and saying, well, let's have a farmer cooperative and
protect ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the largest one of those is Milklink, who've then done a merger with Arla, which is the biggest Swedish-Danish farmer cooperative. So today, you've got, Arla Foods in the UK are probably the biggest processor and the biggest, and represent nearly a third of all dairy farmers. But then you've got other dairy farmers selling their milk directly to a range of, whether it's into chocolate companies or cheese companies or whatever. And as a result of that, you've got a situation where you've got still relatively many sellers, nearly 12,000 in the UK, and probably 5 or 6 major buyers of milk. And if you believe, therefore, that a market will exist fairly to make sure that the value that the farmer gets, the processor gets, and the consumer gets is going to be evenly distributed, then I think history will prove that we are, as the farmers, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And as a result, we as a business firmly believe in farmer cooperatives, because if there's money in the value chain, if the farmer is the processor, then at least he's getting, that bit, and he's not having money. He's not ending up in, the dividend of a public quoted company or a whatever.
So how did that's a really good explanation of how the market works, but how does organic fit within, why the decision to be organic within that system? Or did it mean that you were became outside of that system? Was organic?
No, the whole system was abolished. The whole Milk Marketing Board was abolished, and all the farmers had to find a buyer for their milk. And because there were only a handful of organic farmers, there was nobody going to go, I'm going to undertake all the organic farmers. So they were going to be left with nobody to sell their milk to in a few circumstances. So at that point, I just thought, well, actually, this needs to be done. We need to try and create a market to be able to take the milk from those farmers and put it through into the consumer. And then we did that for the odd 25, 30 years.
Right.
But the reason for organic is that rotational grass-based integrating livestock into a farming system, everything that was virtually on every single farm at one point, because of the value being driven, every industry has got more and more efficient, more and more technology. So it's not just farming, but because the health of our soil and the health of our plants and the health of our animals and the health of us is completely symbiotically linked.
Okay? Yeah, completely agree. Yeah.
At what point do you say, actually, and we all know that with the ultra processed food stats coming out at the moment, that we are consuming huge amounts of food that is doing us damage and it's doing the planet damage. But when you have a completely free market, who is going to stand up and say, well, actually, I know there's some stat where we used to spend 40% of our income on food.
Our great-grandparents, yeah. And now it's down to 10%.
And it's now down to 10%.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant because we can afford to go on holiday, have nice cars, buy entertainment, have loads of phones, mobiles, internet, Netflix, all these things. But to get that to be 10%, the encouragement of multinationals to grow cheaper and cheaper food to provide us so that the consumers can be satisfied with gadgets and technology and entertainment. I mean, who doesn't love going on holiday or watching Netflix or doing, so it's really understandable, but the consequences have got to be proved to be that our health, I think the 18 to 25-year-old age group is up to 65% ultra processed food. Yeah. And it's well documented that you exceed 25% ultra processed food and your health and the health of the nation will begin to deteriorate severely. And Absolutely. We can just see the cost and the results of that everywhere you look. The good news, not being, not being a positive character, is we can eat up to 25% of, ice cream and crisps and donuts and beer, but what we can't do is eat too much of that. Otherwise, it's going to make us, and the cost of that, so you cannot
down the line. Yeah.
So organic was really a massive anchor, because organic cows have got to go outside to grass, because you can't have them in too big, and to do that, you can't have massive sizes because of the animal welfare standards. The organic, what you can't do, basically stopped the adopters of those organic standards of joining the mad rush for the scale and the whatever. But as a British dairy farmer, I have to point out that with, there are different ways of driving a car. You can drive a gas guzzling diesel car, and you can drive an electric vehicle that's powered by the sun. Yeah. In farming, you can buy the oil-based agricultural products, or you can buy the products from the regenerative organic farming system. So the choices that we're making, it's not binary. Yeah. It's not farming is bad. This is good.
Is everything. Yeah. Absolutely.
So you've got herds of, so the average British dairy farm is 150 cows. It's 3 people. I think it's about 50. It's about 50 cows per person as an average, labor input into that whole system. So 3 people working on a family farm is not industrial farming, and that is the average in the UK. And everybody thinks, the 200,000 cows in units in China, or the 50,000 cows in the Middle East, or the 10,000, 20,000 dairy units in California is normal. Okay, it's not. It's what they do because they don't have grass. So we're blessed in the west of England to have grass, and we're blessed that the average dairy farm in this country is still only 150 cows. And that is, but to stop it moving too far, we decided to put the efforts of our labours the last 20 years into trying to grow that organic sector.
Right. Which
and that,
I think you've been incredibly successful at. And so when you were producing organic produce, sort of, and it was labelled as such back in the early days, did the consumer really understand what the difference was compared to now?
It's difficult to so lots of people buy into organic for lots and lots of different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people just want what they perceive to be the best, and they've got enough money to do that. Some people do it for animal welfare reasons. Some people do it for individual health reasons. Some people do it for environmental reasons.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult sell, and it's always been the challenge is, what is it that we need to appeal and explain to consumers about the benefits? And because the benefits are so varied, every marketing company turns around and goes, yeah, but you just got to pick one, haven't you? You got to, and then you just put loads of money and you just tell them this one thing, and it's all about them, and it's about, organic's got so many good stories that we've sort of slightly rabbit in headlights been unable to, and I think that's where regenerative is coming along.
Yeah.
Because, and soil sequestration, and so as I said before, we didn't really, organic was a lot bigger than people's concerns about climate change way before it. Climate change has come booming along on the left-hand side and running up the rails, and in people's consciousness has become probably a hugely much more important topic.
And obviously regenerative is something that we talk about a lot, because we've kind of founded our business on particularly with the grazing animals, from producers who are using regenerative methods to rebuild soil carbon, improve biodiversity. And of course, now there are ways of measuring that. Some of them are organic and some of them are not organic, in that they're not certified. So just to sort of make some clear distinctions here, organic is always going to be more sustainable than conventional, but that wouldn't necessarily make it regenerative. But if you are regenerative, you're not necessarily organic either. But there's a really amazing point where the two would meet, which is probably the best case scenario. Would that sound about right?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, if you take America, so food production, because we're only spending 10% of our incomes on food production has been driven down a industrialized system that has depleted huge amounts of carbon and is producing not very good food. Okay, that's one side. With organic, you've got it far on the other side. And if you look at what's happening in America, whether it's Kellogg's or PepsiCo or McCain's, they're committing billions of dollars and billions of acres, or not billions, millions of acres, to regenerating the soil carbon, because they realize they've probably gone massively too far. So if food producers across the world are part of the problem, and that's how consumers see it, wouldn't it be brilliant if we actually can find a method of food production that is part of the system and part of the solution? And whether that's organic regenerative, whether it's regenerative, you just got to look at the cause and effect of, the scale. So I think organic is 2% in the UK. But if you wanted to add up, bite-sized chunks of good, it's having a vibrant organic sector has influenced a lot of farmers to adopt other methods of herbal lays and composting. And so any debate has got extremes, and you've got to have a really good and vibrant organic sector to stop the industrial sector going even more industrial.
Sure. So you've described something there that's really set my brain off thinking. You said that the UK we're wet, we're temperate, we're a temperate maritime climate, we grow grass and pasture very, very well. Whereas, and you were contrasting that to places in America where they have large dairy farms where the land isn't so suitable. So for that larger setup, being organic, or because organic is things that you're not allowed to do as much as it is things that you're supposed to do. It's correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's preventing you from doing things that are damaging as much as it is things that are restoring. But we've got a climate here. I actually thought the figure would be higher than 2%. We've got a climate here that seems to me to be very conducive towards organic beef and dairy production. Yeah, I'm quite surprised that so few people are doing it. Is there a significant market value difference in the produce to a farmer?
I think the average organic premium has ranged between 6 and 10p for the last 20 years. It sort of fluctuates along at that level. And when that translates to the end products, it is more expensive.
Sure.
But it is not that much expensive, and it depends on your viewpoint as to the types of food that you want. I mean, I think the UK debate is fascinating, because it seems that and I think Monty Don came out last week or something with some classic comment that all the environmentalists, the ecologists, and the billionaires are all having their sort of vanity projects and wanting to rewild half of England, and he sort of called them out and said it's not really what it should be about. And that is exactly, I mean, we describe ourselves as farmers that want to produce healthy, natural food. Yep. And that is our job. What is my job? It's to produce, we're farmers, and we take milk from other farmers, and it is really simple. Healthy, natural food is what we need to produce. And if you produce that from a farming system, that is also regenerating the soil carbon stocks, and the benefits then of nature and everything like that. So I think it's a sort of, it is, to use the whole farming chicken and egg thing. If you do the soil properly, then you get healthy natural food, and you get fantastic biodiversity. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
And then you get fantastic health for individuals.
Yeah.
If you try and use sticking plasters on health, okay, so allow people to have an ultra processed diet, but then go, oh, you've got to take the vitamins for the calcium because you're not getting that, and then you need the B12 and you need the iodine, and and if you look at the sticking plaster approach to biodiversity, it's like, oh, let's save the butterfly in that field, and those are sticking plaster approaches. The ground up approach is, if we farm regeneratively enough land, then we will regenerate biodiversity, we will generate carbon, and the output is that we
have healthier, better food and more resilient food systems. Yeah, I think it's probably worth, just for the sake of anyone listening to this, to define what we mean by regenerative. And I'm going to sort of let you know, as I understand it, and you can tell me if you think I've got it right or wrong. But to me, regenerative is outcome based rather than process driven. So it's not a system that's telling you to do certain things or not do certain things. It's purely down to the outcome of the results of your actions. Would you agree with that?
Partly.
Okay.
But the outcomes that you're getting are a result of what you're doing.
Sure.
Okay? So we phrase it very simply, is that by integrating livestock, maximizing diversity, protecting the soil surface, keeping a living root, and minimizing disturbance, what that gives us is better air quality and water, carbon capture, animal welfare, biodiversity, and nutrient dense food that's healthy. So we want those, but we do have to do something
to get to the end result.
So you've got, your actions have got to be, farming in a regenerative way. And actually so I would argue that organic covers off probably 80% of regenerative. There are 5 or 6 other levers that you could pull to make it
More regenerative.
10% regenerative.
Right.
Okay. So there are things around composting and, whether it's anaerobic or bokashi composting, whether it's separating your slurry and composting the fiber and not putting it onto the fields to turn into greenhouse gases, whether it's the mob grazing adoption system that allows more sugar to flow down into the roots and into the microbes. So there are lots of levers that you can pull, and we're in the middle of we started about a year ago something called the Yeo Valley Regenerative Farming Project, where we've got 25 farms that we're measuring carbon at 3 different depths to a level of 1 sample per hectare. So we're measuring at that materiality across 15,000 acres. And then we're working on the knowledge sharing systems whereby we've got a baseline.
Yeah.
If we pull these levers in 10 years' time, the baseline may have gone up. And if it has gone up by a certain amount, then we can work out that we've put X amount more carbon in the soil.
Amazing. Yeah, this is what we need. I feel like the conversation, the movement needs some science and figures behind it. A lot of the research I've done is so focused on the US, which is obviously, a different climate to here. But so within something you mentioned there was rotation. So when I think you guys said that you're a mixed farm, right? You're not just farming dairy.
Yep, no, we're a mixed. So our intention is to grow every crop on the farm that's fed to an animal on the farm, and to finish every animal born on the farm on the farm. Right.
So are you actually moving, rotating the fields that the cattle and crops are grown in at different times to have a cycle of restoring the nutrition to the soil? Or is it that some areas are arable and some areas are dairy? How do you organize that?
So we've got probably 500 acres of grazing for the cows. We've got 500 acres of grass for the winter silage, and we've got 500 acres of arable crops. So all of the grassland, apart from the permanent pasture and the slopey bits, will go into, but the grazing for the cows will probably go into a 7 or 8 year rotation with herbal lays, and then 1 or 2 years worth of, and we'll probably grow peas, oats and barley as a sort of whole crop silage or a crimp grain for the cattle. The fields that are further away from where the milking parlours are probably in a 5 year rotation, where it'll be 3 years worth of grass and 2 years worth of cereal crops. So we're trying to, and so the sampling on our farm, we've got, as of 2020, we had 102,299 tons of carbon in the soil on the 2,000 acres. And that was as a result of over 1,300 soil samples done at 3 different depths. So we know what our stock of, as an accountant, that's my opening stock. In 10 years' time, my closing stock will be whatever it's going to be. And if that ends up being, 152,000 tons of carbon, then I know that I've built 5,000 tons, 5,000 tons of carbon every year, which is more than my carbon footprint.
Amazing. So
if we can do that,
incredible.
Then but if so we populated all our results into a heat map for the farm, and you can see there are some fields that are as low as sort of 3.8, 3.9. There are fields that are up at 13% carbon.
It's incredibly high, no? I mean, that's incredible soil.
Well, the 13% is slightly peaty. We just got, so there's 285 different types of soil in the UK. So this is not an exact science,
Right, it's incredible.
But if you look at it as a heat map, and as with coronavirus, we're all used to seeing bloody heat maps with which is darker red. So for us, the darker green is the more carbon.
Right.
And generally, where it is darkest is where we have the dairy units or the young stock units. So the ones that over the last 60 years that we've been farming here, those ones where we've had animals more of that time are generally darker green than the areas where would have been more cropping or more arable crops and things like that. And so it sort of tells you that actually the dark green bit where the cows are is the bit that is higher in carbon. Well, that is actually not. It's not just indicating; it is
there.
irrefutable. That, and what we've got to do is then go. Well, the ones that are a bit further away, can we pull a few levers that increase, stable fuel from 5.83% carbon to 7.83?
Yeah.
Because 2 on 6 is a 30% increase.
Yeah. Understood. But I think I understand this, but I just wanted to clarify. Obviously, methane and carbon are released by the cattle through enteric fermentation, through the microbes in their gut breaking down the cellulose. So when you say it's a net loss of carbon, are you calculating in the greenhouse gases released by the cows through burps and farts, and looking at the difference of input and output? So the output is the burps and the farts, and the input is what's going into the soil. And are we hitting a negative figure when the outputs from fermentation are taken into account?
Yeah. So our carbon footprint on our own farms, when compared against the 5 years from 2015 to 2020, we had a surplus of 30% in the buildup of carbon versus the total farm footprint, which included all the greenhouse gas calculations, et cetera, et cetera.
Incredible.
And because we did that, we were so enthused by that we said, actually, let's work with 30 farmers and let's measure all of their farms. Because if we can prove that by perfecting the levers and doing the measuring, that we can actually, I think it's like 866 gigabillion tons or whatever it is of carbon has been lost from agricultural soils in the last 250 years. If we can put it all back, I mean, there are some outrageous claims coming out of America that farmers can sequester the total world output of CO2 into land every year, which, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But as farmers, it's really up to us to start trying, okay?
Yeah.
And if we can pull the levers and start reversing climate change and produce healthy natural food, then that's just great for society as a whole. We can probably then end up flying more often or whatever it is.
We can afford it. We put it in the bank, yeah. So within your system, and I personally think that mixed systems have to be the future of how we produce food, is maybe slightly smaller scale, or even if it's on a large scale, a different way of organizing how crops and animals are moved around. But the problem is most farms aren't like you. Most farmers, they do one thing and they're trying to get one thing out of the land year after year after year. And I mean this particularly with an arable farmer. How do you think going into the future could we work with conventional arable producers to get animals back on the land, to put the nutrition back so that they can, I'm imagining you're running almost as close to a zero input closed loop as you can with your farm, that you don't need anything external, and yet we're still able, through the upcycling of nutrients, to take a protein and fat rich product out of that system without causing its collapse, if you like.
Because the sun's energy comes in, it cuts the CO2, and so if going back to the methane cycle, I was trying to explain it to one of my children the other day, and therefore, if I'm talking as if I'm addressing a sort of 10-year-old, they'll be.
This is great. This is great.
They'll be a bit pissed off because they're all over 18, actually. But the CO2 in the atmosphere that's in the room that you're in, the CO2 that you're breathing out, having taken the oxygen into your body, sits the CO2 there. In that magic thing of photosynthesis, the sun and the CO2 and water basically merge, and it creates sugar, which is C6H12O6. Yep. So the CO2 that was in the atmosphere releases the oxygen, and that carbon atom forms the sugar that then flows down through the plant.
Carbohydrates.
Some of it is retained in the plant, some of it goes into the soil, and the microbes eat it, and that's how the carbon gets there. So the carbon is in the plant. Okay, the cow eats it, and then its bacteria digest it, and it pops out the cow in the form of CH4. CH4 is then that same carbon that was in the atmosphere, that's gone into the sugar, that's gone into the plant, that's gone into the cow, pops out the cow, and then it breaks down into CO2 within a very short space of time.
About 9 years, right?
9 years. Yeah. And then what happens? Well, the carbon goes back into the plant again. So as long as within that loop, you're leaving more carbon in the soil than you are in the atmosphere, then that is what I would consider to be regenerative.
Because it's a net loss.
Because it is a net loss from the atmosphere to the soil.
That's absolutely brilliant description. Thank you so much. But then to me, the next stage of that is how can we then integrate that into the other things that we eat? Because I think if you have a closed loop of that happening on a suckler herd or a dairy farm, you can get to the point where the only inputs are sunlight and rainwater, and you're continuing this cycle. But as you said earlier, I think so much carbon has been lost from our arable land because of the action of ploughing. Can you see of any ways that we can start integrating no-till methods with animal rotations for arable producers to get the carbon back in the soil? Another criticism that we hear a lot is, when we're telling people they should eat only pasture-raised beef, is that there's not enough space, there's not enough room, there's not enough farmland to feed everybody this way. And our response is always that if the animals are put into rotation with crops, we have more than enough. What are your thoughts on how this could happen, and what needs to be done within the arable world to start getting their head around this idea of integrating animals?
So, being an exceedingly biased Southwest farmer and not being a farmer, well, in fact, actually, there was an article in the paper on the weekend, and it actually called me out and called me Tim Mead farmer. And I said to my mother, I said, look, I've arrived now. That's it. I'm a farmer.
You've made it.
But the problem, so on all the arable farms, there used to be on all the arable farms, there used to be animals, because that was how it was done. The thing that changed is that arable farmers could go to the oil-based, they could go to the bag for the inputs. They didn't have to grow the grass and the clover to get the fertility in the ground. So oil-based farming. So if arable farmers want to go away from oil-based farming, then they've got to use the sun's energy and convert that somehow into the crops. The problem is most of the arable farmers, the farms are now huge because farmers have got bigger. I don't know. Is it one man now can do 1,000 acres of an arable farm with the big tractors and the whatever? So if you've got 1,000 acres of arable farm and you've got all the equipment and you've got one person who can do that, they're not going to start putting up fences. They're not going to start moving cattle. It is the costs that are driving the system. So I think the vast majority of arable farms, you drive across Salisbury Plain and you can't see a fence and the opportunity to put animals in there. The government have got every single thing stacked against farmers cooperating, whether it's from the tax perspective or whether it's the law around tenancy. There are lots and lots of things that stop farmers cooperating between the two of them. It's like 80% of all the beef cattle are born to the dairy herd, and then they go off and, so what the government can do in terms of, we've no longer got a agricultural policy, driven by Europe. So the British government have got the ability to set the policy, and they seem to be dithering around, rewilding the west of the country and massively intensifying the already intensified soils, which will potentially destroy them, or they've got to advocate a policy that reintroduces animal and livestock into the areas that it'll be needed. But there's no, at the moment, the billionaire rewilding environmentalists, save the biodiversity lobby is so strong because it's so appealing to consumers that the public money for public good mantra of elms and all the bits and pieces that are being discussed at the moment, it's like, well, the greatest single public good is the provision of natural healthy food. And if they do that, the consequences will be the biodiversity and all of that stuff. And that goes back to my previous point about getting the old elastoplast out and sticking over all the cracks, or actually sorting out the problem.
So it is going to be hard to get our arable to be as regenerative as people like yourself are making animal farming, really. And this is something that I've looked into and written about a little bit, trying to work out how our sort of food security can progress. And I came to the conclusion that the only way you can really have arable that is regenerative is if other people are producing animal agriculture that is regenerative, and you're sharing resources in some way. But the problem is, in the closed loop that you're talking about, you don't have slurry pits where you're collecting huge amounts of muck that you can then sell to the arable farmer to then, replenish the soil. It needs to actually, the animals need to be on the land, and they need to be kind of living on the land. But are you guys sort of also...
So how do you reverse, 100 years of the shift from the sort of, the monoculture agriculture that has developed on the arable lot to the, let's face it, most of the West is also dedicated itself to, sheep farmers or dairy farmers or beef farmers. And how do you go back to an integrated mixed rotational farming system across the whole country, which is, I think, what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean,
we are hugely lucky that we've managed to buy some farms next to the original farm where we can grow some cereals, but also as dairy farmers, we don't need to get the cereals dry, so we can either make whole crop silage or crimped grain.
Got you.
So
okay.
We can harvest our, we're generally finished, even on the Mendip Hills, we're generally finished harvest by the end of July, because we're not trying to get the crops dry enough.
Perfect dried, yeah.
But we're very lucky in that we've got enough land in the rotation for the numbers that we've got. How you go about reversing and encouraging, arable farmers to adopt integrated animal livestock farming into their, and there are quite a few people beginning to do it, where they've realized that their farms are completely, there's a point in time when the soil dies, and it's been proven, sort of, in Africa with the overgrazing, and it's been proven that animals managed in the right way can restore the desertification that's happened, and that has been, and that's why, because of the mass decline in America on the sort of plains and the prairies of, the soil nutrients, that's why they are adopting regenerative farming in a far bigger way than we are in the UK at the moment.
I'd love to see a point where I think a dairy farmer and a beef farmer is a sort of modern nomad, visiting, having portable, transportable milking parlours and even abattoirs, and is moving around arable land where it's needed, and following the point where the arable is drilled instead of being tilled, and trying to, I was quite inspired on a visit to Kingsclear Estates, where the farmer up there, Tim Mead, I think he's got 2,500 acres, and he has a mobile milking parlour so that he can put the dairy into the arable rotation. And to me, that seems like a sort of wonderful solution. But people,
I think it's, I mean, down here in Somerset, sort of, I don't know, 40, 50 years ago, where we got all the, you got the Somerset levels, and you got the sort of moors down around Weston-super-Mare and all that sort of stuff. Basically, farmers would have their land, but they would also have their moorland. And basically, the cows and the milking bale would go to the moor for the summer,
right?
And they would be milked through the six or the 4 milking bale. But technology has come on hugely, and the ability, so we've got, some of these collars on the, the sort of GPS collars for the beef cattle on the mob grazing, that allows you to do it without all the fencing and the moving and the labour and the bits and pieces. So technology has a huge part to play, and we have at various stages played around with designing mobile milking parlours,
right.
Where they can, move every day, that you can then get the solar energy going to feed them. And then you can take all the cows to the bit of the farm that never gets grazed.
That needs it, right.
That needs it. And therefore, we're lucky enough that we can take their muck from the winter to those parts of the farm.
So you guys have trialed this sort of an idea to see if you can make it work, this idea of kind of keeping things much more fluid and mobile.
Oh, absolutely.
Incredible.
And so we've got various discussion documents internally. I'm very lucky that one of the guys that worked with me in our manufacturing business is now working on the farm side. So he's built yogurt plants and milk factories and sort of from a technical point of view, huge amounts of knowledge and whatever. And we're taking that and trying to come up with the solutions for the ultimate mobile milking system.
So work is being done to this idea, this idea of just integrating farms across the board. How you said something that I had no knowledge about, that things are set up to make it very difficult for different types of farmers to cooperate. And obviously, if we're trying to say to a guy who's been doing, that's his arable farm that he's had for however many years, and he's used to, planting it and growing it, and we're trying to get some animals onto that rotation. How could the cooperation work between somebody like yourself who has the knowledge of how animals could restore the soil health to that guy and actually implementing it? What are the barriers and the potential for that to happen?
I think there's a whole load of legislation, and I'm not up to date with the current things about tenancy agreements and
right.
And in the old days you had milk quota that was getting in the way of farmers sharing bits of, so in the old days, if you used another farmer's farm and you had some milk quota, then he could claim part of the milk quota was his.
God, right, got you.
Okay. If you invest money in fencing, one type of farmer can claim tax relief on it, but if you don't own the land, then you can't claim the tax relief on it, or it's a capital item and not a, and then there's the whole sitting tenant thing is like, when do you create, if you allow somebody else to farm your land, when do you create a tenancy that, that enables that you can't then ask him to leave?
Right.
And some of these things, so it's just historically, there's legislation that doesn't make it easy, so every agriculture is a holding, for instance. So moving cattle, it means that you've got to move them to another holding and get them TB tested, and therefore, so people are protecting their holdings, and if they then took somebody else's cattle on it that did have TB or something, then their whole holding would be locked up in so there's lots and lots and lots of little things that somebody in the government could go through and say, if we want to make it really easy for farmers to cooperate to move cattle to the areas where we want it to be, they'd probably come up with a list of 10 or 15 things. And then they could then look at all the tax breaks and
incentivize people. So
incentivize people to do the,
take away the stick and make the carrot bigger, kind of thing. And try.
And it's always a little bit of both, isn't it?
Yeah.
And and then you've got the big spectre. So you got there is an element of people who believe that technology is going to be the ultimate solution to feeding the world, and that technology is around ultra processed. So the spectrum is that you can take nutrients every day out of a bottle and probably sustain life. My view is that won't happen, because we are symbiotically related to plants and animals and whatever. And if we extract ourselves from that because we think we're the greater human, then that will just end up in disaster.
Yeah.
And therefore, all of the fake meats and the fake milks and the whatever. And then everybody goes, yeah, but it's all about saving the planet. And no, it's not. It's about making billionaires. If you look at the people who've invested in all the fake meat companies and all the fake plant companies, they're all people who've made money selling consumer goods like clothes or Amazon parcels or whatever it is.
Or make, in James Cameron's case, making movies and things like that.
Yeah. So, and they just think, and it's not, I would prefer, so I live to eat. Unfortunately, I love food. I love great food, and
I'm in the food business as well,
and all that sort of stuff. If you're eating to live, that is a completely different approach, and that's not for me. It might be for other people, but the evidence of ultra processed food and the damage that it's doing to people's health, and it might be okay for 1 or 2 or 4% of the population who can eat the good ultra processed or the nutrients, but the vast population will be fed a continuing diet that makes them sick and the planet sick.
It's very interesting. I'm going to pick up on something you mentioned earlier, because my previous podcast guest is a nutritionist, and we were talking a lot about inflammation from ultra processed foods. And he was explaining to me how when somebody is in their teens or 20s, and very active, their body has a huge reserve of antioxidants, so they can afford to have high levels of inflammation caused by highly processed foods with apparently no ill effects. But what happens is you actually deplete your body's ability to deal with those ultra processed foods, and you deplete your antioxidants. And our diets now are calorie rich and nutrient poor. And he was saying, because you said it earlier, I think, that young people now are eating more highly processed foods than we did when we were younger. And what this is going to cause is massive health epidemic when the young people on this diet now are in their 40s, 50s and 60s, unless we can seriously reconnect with a more natural food system. And I like you, I think I'm a great believer in we need to start thinking of ourselves as a part of nature rather than separate from it. And these ultra processed fake meats, somebody described them as they're not food. You're eating intellectual property. You're eating 12 patents, and that's where the motivation is coming from.
And you can sort of see the appeal of eat this and it saves the planet because it's made of plant and whatever.
Seems obvious, yeah.
But if it's not true, okay, and it's not doing you any good, and it's a load of old guff, okay, and then you look to see who owns most of these companies, and they probably are the companies that have been selling us a load of crap for the last 50 years.
Yeah, they're made from cheap commodity crops at the end of the day, all of these products.
And it's a real battle to stand up and say, because who doesn't like a bloody sausage roll and a pint and a
I know, right?
And a packet of crisps or whatever.
Because they taste good, because the scientists know how to trigger our reward centers in our brain and make these things taste good from an evolutionary standpoint. But we've been going for quite a while now, so can we just have a bit of a thought on where do you see? Give me the optimistic future for your business, Tim. Where do you see things going for the next sort of 10, 20, 50 years?
Well, I would like to think that the truth will out, okay? And eventually, everybody's a bloody expert. Everybody can go onto the internet and find out this, that, whatever. But you've just got, so soil is obviously the center of everything. You can smell soil, you can taste soil, you can look at soil, and that is going to, produce you healthy crops and healthy animals. So hopefully the truth will out. How that happens, everybody's got to have a concerted effort. But the opportunity, okay, for us to become the regeneration, the regenerative farming, if we are the regeneration, it is up to each and every one of us to make the choices around fast fashion, around the car we drive, the electricity we consume, the amount of holidays, what type of food, And I think with food, it's slightly because it is a choice that you make all the time, and because there is an addictive nature to the salt, sugar, fat combo that they can feed us. When you're making a decision on your next car, you know that everybody's probably looking at electric cars, and that is a big decision. When it's food, you're making that decision what to eat probably 10, 15 times a day than when you go shopping. So you're not consciously, and it's up to people like us and people like yourself to share our knowledge, and definitely not to preach at people and say you can't ever have a pork scratchings and a pint, because it's probably not worth living for if you can do that. But the opportunity to know that we as a generation, another generation, can make choices, and if we choose the right choices, we can reverse climate change. What happened to the hole in the ozone layer? I haven't heard about that one.
Yeah, that's true. From all the aerosols in the 80s, right? Yeah.
Maybe we sorted that one out, and if we did, that's a great example of saying, actually,
we can fix things.
We can fix stuff, and but it is upon every single one of us to make choices. And I make really bad choices at times. I went to see my son in Canada because he'd been out there for 2 years, locked down, and we wanted to go and see our son after 2 years. And but that will continue to happen in everybody's lives.
It's about balance, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about balance. We can't judge, and the time frame of judgment has just become so tiny, that every single action or whatever gets judged. But generally, I think, relying on, I trust British farmers to do the right thing. And I trust British consumers to understand that and realize that it's not the government that are going to make things better. It's not big companies that are going to make things better. It is, whatever it is, the 63 million people who live in this country will be the people that will determine what we do. And it's up to people to sort of say it as it is, really.
Treat your food choices as a political act and move forward.
Yeah. As long as it's not too much cake.
Or pork scratchings.
Or pork scratchings.
That's been amazing. I feel like we've gone on a full journey there of what's led us into trouble and what could potentially lead us out of it. So
can I have a plug at the end of this?
Go for it. Now's the time.
4th of August, Valley Fest, 10,000 people, Regenerative Food and Farming Festival. It's about our 6th year. It's held overlooking Yeo Valley Lake in whatever. We've got, I think, Travis are playing, Clean Bandit, and a whole load of other stuff. And we'll be featuring a whole load of regenerative food and farming. And we run the festival with a guy called Luke Hazel, who is, he runs a sort of regenerative farming, organic meat business as well.
Can we be involved in some way? I'd love to.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll put a link on with this podcast, but we'll definitely get that plug out there.
So last year it was held 3 weeks after the government said you could hold festivals. So we still managed to deliver an experience for 8,000 people. This year our license is 10,000. But we've got some great bands, we got some great talks, the views are fantastic.
Brilliant. I'll be there. Thank you.
And anybody wants to hear about regenerative and taste regenerative food, just come on down.
So it's like bringing groundswell to the consumer.
It is, with a bit
Love it.
And of course, being Somerset, there's a bit of cider thrown in.
Love it. I love cider too. I'm in.
You're in. Brilliant.
Thank you very much.